A bronze plaque catches the light. A leopard crouches in high relief, its body gleaming, its teeth bared, a royal attendant by its side holding the sword of a king. To the untrained eye, it might look like decoration. To the people of Benin, it was memory, history, and sacred continuity. In February 1897, that world was consumed by fire. British troops stormed the city, toppled the palace, and carried away thousands of sacred works. For more than a century, these treasures sat in foreign museums, severed from the shrines and courtyards they once animated. Now, at last, they are returning home. This is not only the story of how they were made and how they were stolen. It is also the story of how their return is reshaping the way the world thinks about justice, heritage, and the power of museums. The Benin Bronzes were not trinkets carved for curiosity. They were state records. They were shrines. They were archives cast in glowing metal and carved in ivory. In February 1897, that continuity was torn apart in just 3 days. Centuries of accumulated history were scattered across the globe. The stakes of this story remain urgent. For the Edo people, these works are the living symbols of ancestry and identity. For museums in Europe and America, their possession has become a burden. Each return sparks a debate about ownership, restitution, and memory. The arc of this story runs from the brilliance of Benin's artists, through the violence of colonial looting, to the fragile work of repair now unfolding in our own time. The Kingdom of Benin, located in what is now Edo State in Nigeria, rose as one of West Africa's most enduring powers. Its rulers, the Obas, presided over a centralized monarchy with a court bureaucracy that managed both ritual and governance. Benin City astonished early European visitors. Dutch traders described avenues broad enough for 10 men to ride abreast. The capital was surrounded by earthworks so vast they dwarfed many European fortifications. At its center stood the royal palace, a sprawling complex of courtyards and shrines. From here, the Oba regulated trade, received envoys, and commanded armies. The kingdom was never isolated. By the late 15th century, Portuguese merchants had established relations, bringing textiles, firearms, and brass rings. In return, they received ivory, pepper, and other goods. These encounters did not diminish the Oba's authority. They enriched the court by supplying brass and copper, metals that would feed the guilds of artists who turned them into masterpieces. The phrase Benin Bronzes covers a wide spectrum of royal art, though most are actually brass or copper alloy rather than true bronze. There were plaques, created from the 16th century onward. Each plaque captured scenes of warriors, nobles, priests, and foreign visitors. These plaques once lined the wooden pillars of the palace courtyards. A visitor walking through the corridors would see history unfolding around them in shining relief. There were commemorative heads of Obas and Queen Mothers. Cast in bronze, they wore coral crowns, their faces calm and resolute. Each head once supported a carved ivory tusk that rose above it, spiraling with miniature scenes of victories, coronations, and treaties. There were ivory masks, most famously, the serene face of Queen Idia, the mother of Oba Esiji. Worn at the waist during rituals, her mask symbolized wisdom and authority. There were also ceremonial swords, coral bead crowns, carved staffs, and ritual bells. The artists belonged to hereditary guilds tied to the palace. They worked with the lost wax casting method, a painstaking process that captured every bead and whisker. Early visitors wrote of palace pillars covered from top to bottom in plaques, each one glinting in the sun. These were not ornaments for sale. They were royal archives, shrines, and instruments of power. Imagine stepping into the palace on a festival day in the 17th century. The air smells of incense. The sound of gongs reverberates through the courtyards. Drummers pound rhythms that echo against the carved pillars. As you walk, every surface around you tells a story. A plaque shows warriors lined in formation, spears poised. Another depicts a procession of priests bearing ritual objects. Leopards appear in repetition, their spots hammered into the metal, their bodies symbols of the Oba's strength. A Portuguese merchant is immortalized in relief, his hat tall, his hands heavy with brass rings. At the far end of the colonnade stands a shrine. On it rests a bronze head of a past Oba, crowned in coral. Rising above it is an ivory tusk, its surface covered with spiraling scenes, hunts, parades, offerings. The shrine is not only a memorial, it is a conversation with ancestors, a link between the present and the past. This was the world that stood in Benin City before the invasion of 1897. By the late 19th century, Britain had turned its attention more fully toward West Africa. Palm oil was a prized commodity. Control over trade meant profit and power. The Oba's court insisted on its rituals and protocols. For the Edo, trade could only take place at certain times and under royal sanction. To the British, these customs looked like obstacles. In January 1897, a group of British officials set out for Benin City, calling their mission peaceful. They had been warned to delay their arrival because royal rituals were underway. They ignored those warnings. Outside the city, they were ambushed. Several were killed. London seized on the incident. Headlines described it as savagery. Within weeks, a punitive expedition was prepared. The empire had its justification. The balance of power was already one-sided. The ambush became the spark that lit the fire. February 1897. The silence of the courtyards is shattered by artillery. British forces shell Benin City. Smoke rises above the palace. Soldiers march through the gates, rifles at the ready. Shrines collapse. Altars are overturned. The Oba flees into the countryside, but is later captured and sent into exile. Priests scatter as courtiers fall. The Sacred Heart of Benin is consumed by fire. For 3 days, the looting continues. Plaques are ripped from pillars and stacked in boxes. Bronze heads are pried from ancestral altars. Ivory tusks are lifted from shrines. Coral crowns and ritual staffs are crated. More than 900 plaques vanish. 5 centuries of heritage are uprooted and labeled as spoils. A photograph survives of British officers sitting beside crates piled high. Their expressions are composed, almost indifferent. Inside those crates lay the memory of a kingdom, its stories torn from the walls in a single weekend. Back in London, the bronzes were unveiled to the public. 304 plaques went on display that autumn. The British Museum kept more than 200. The rest were sold to defray the cost of the expedition. Collectors competed to buy them. German institutions moved quickly, acquiring large holdings for museums in Berlin, Hamburg, Stuttgart, and Cologne. British regional museums received their share. American collectors and institutions soon followed. Plaques and ivory masks crossed the Atlantic into New York, Boston, and Washington. Today, more than 160 museums across the world hold Benin objects. The British Museum alone houses about 900. For over a century, what had once been a single archive in Benin City has been scattered across continents, divided into cases and catalogs. The dispersal was not accidental. Each transfer was documented, sold, or donated with pride. In Europe, exhibitions framed the bronzes as trophies of conquest. In America, they were displayed as curiosities of a so-called primitive culture. Rarely did labels acknowledge the fire and looting that brought them there. From the moment of independence in 1960, Nigeria pressed for the return of its treasures. The Oba's palace demanded the sacred objects back. Officials described them as the dignity of their people, not commodities for foreign display. The British Museum resisted. The law of 1963 locked its collection. Directors argued that the bronzes were ambassadors of world culture, best kept in London for all to see. Some claimed Nigeria lacked the facilities to conserve them. These arguments struck many as echoes of colonial condescension. Nigerians responded with persistence. Conservation capacity could be built. Loans and exchanges could ensure access. Ownership and dignity could not be negotiated away. The debate intensified with global shifts. In 1970, UNESCO adopted a convention against illicit trade in cultural property. By the early 21st century, the Benin Bronzes had become a symbol of colonial injustice. Campaigns grew louder. Pressure mounted. The first cracks appeared in the early 2020s. In 2021, Jesus College in Cambridge returned a bronze plaque. The University of Aberdeen returned a bronze head. The Horniman Museum in London announced a pledge to return more. Momentum accelerated. In 2022, Glasgow voted to return 17 bronzes. Germany signed a landmark deal to return more than 1,000. That December, Germany's foreign minister stood in Benin City, handing over 21 bronzes in a ceremony filled with emotion. Elders wept. Crowds cheered as ancestral faces emerged from crates into the African light once more. In 2023, Nigeria's president issued a decree recognizing the Oba of Benin as custodian of all returned bronzes. The law aligned with tradition, confirming that the sacred works belong to the palace and its people. In February 2025, Nigeria's Museums Commission signed a custody agreement with the Oba's court. The bronzes would remain the property of the Oba, while the museums handled conservation and display. This partnership balanced heritage and access. Only months later, another milestone was reached. In June 2025, the Netherlands returned 119 bronzes, the largest Dutch restitution to date. The Oba called the return a divine intervention. For the first time in more than a century, the Royal Archive of Benin was visibly reassembling. Returning the bronzes means more than bringing them across borders. It means creating a home worthy of them. In Benin City, construction has begun on the Edo Museum of West African Art. Designed by architect David Adjaye, the museum rises near the ruins of the old palace. Its galleries are planned to echo the lost colonnades. Its conservation labs will preserve the delicate surfaces of brass and ivory. The custody agreement ensures partnership. The Oba remains the owner and spiritual guardian. Nigeria's National Museum Service conserves, catalogs, and shares the works with scholars and visitors. Together, they form a model for restitution that respects tradition while ensuring global access. When the museum opens its doors, visitors will once again walk corridors lined with plaques, just as palace courtiers did centuries ago. The difference is that now the story of their absence and return will be part of the display. Each object is more than art. Each plaque, head, and mask is a vessel of ancestry. In the palace, they connected the living Oba with those who came before. They anchored rituals and gave visible form to memory. When they were torn away, that dialogue was broken. For Edo descendants, their return is not symbolic. It is the restoration of continuity. For museums in Europe and America, the returns signal a shift in philosophy. The age of possession is giving way to the age of partnership. Empty plinths and display cases marked "Return to Benin City 2025" can teach visitors more powerfully than silent objects ever did. They remind us that history includes loss and repair, not only preservation. Globally, the returns set a precedent. They show that restitution is possible, that colonial wounds can be acknowledged, and that memory can be restored with dignity. At the time of this recording, more returns are scheduled. Germany is preparing shipments of over 1,000 objects. The Netherlands has already sent more than 100. Discussions continue with British institutions, including the British Museum. New agreements, ceremonies, and milestones will be listed in the description and pinned comment. This is a living story, and each month adds a new chapter. For 5 centuries, the Kingdom of Benin cast its memory into metal and ivory. In 1897, that memory was torn away in fire and smoke. Now, in our own lifetime, it is returning. When a bronze head is lifted from a crate in Benin City and the crowd erupts, it is not only a transfer, it is a page of history turning back toward justice. So what do you think? Should museums hold looted objects for global access? Or does justice mean sending them home first and building new partnerships after? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this speak to you, subscribe. There are more untold histories waiting to be heard.